A very warm welcome from me as well. My name is Gudrun Bunkenburg, and you've been able to find me in training management for many, many years. I've been in contact with bioresonance, according to Paul Schmidt, for, over 20 years now. And I think I've experienced pretty much everything you can experience, which means, of course, I know how to test with the Rayoscan. And I started with the BNPS, then naturally switched to the RAH and also experienced those fluctuations. I find it really interesting in this community of users that whatever you're successful with, you always say, that's it. And when something new is offered, everyone flinches and completely freezes up, a bit like today with phytotherapy, right? Is that possible? Does it work? I can only tell you, I think by now, nobody can imagine life without the RAH. So that's a really interesting development, and I'm very glad that we keep getting new things and that this system simply continues to evolve. That's the main point. And once we had all coped with the RAH and everyone said, yes, this is great, it's available for human, it's available for vet, then came the scan. And then the same story all over again. Lots and lots of skeptical people who all said, hey, the Rayoscan, that's mine. And I have it. I can also explain to my clients how it works. I don't want to give it up either. No, we don't want you to give it up either. But there are people who don't want to work with it. And our goal is really to bring the system closer to as many people as possible. And I don't even know, I'm in this wonderful position where I have the opportunity, to also participate in what else can be integrated, but I also get to deal with the observational studies. And for years, it's a bit like door-to-door sales, also knocked on doctors' doors and said, hey, we have something really great. Maybe you'd like to try it out too. And what has happened since we've had the scan? The whole thing has completely turned around. Doctors are knocking on our door and saying, hey, I have a lot of patients where I really don't know what to do anymore. And I know that you do studies. We've seen by now that nothing negative can happen. I'd like to try it. And then these observational studies, these results, or also the studies that we're all doing now, also what the foundation is now supporting, I think ultimately this totally benefits all of us. And therefore, right from the start, because today I have the topic of the ITP-Scan, I don't want to persuade anyone to use the scan. But I would be super happy if those who haven't used it so far would just try it out. Because this is simply the continuation of the system. It just goes a step further, and it's simply fascinating what is possible with it. If someone asks me, we travel a lot in the world, internationally too, and then very often the question comes up, so what is the best? Is the scan much better than the Rayoscan? Or is bioresonance, according to Paul Schmidt, the fundamental frequency values better than the RAH? My answer, quite honestly, is this. It has to suit me as a therapist, it has to suit the patient and the illness that I have in front of me. And if as we were just discussing, I have a nice idea later for seriously ill patients, how we can optimally now apply our spectrum, then I simply say, then be fair and try it out. Just have another look and see, okay, with this patient, it works now with bioresonance, according to Paul Schmidt, with the individual fundamental frequency values. Here, an RAH has totally proven itself. My favorite is to combine both, but I wouldn't want to do without a scan either. And that, I think, makes the whole thing so lively and also so complete. And I would just be totally happy about that. Remember, trying it out for free has been around as long as I've been in the system. I started with a trial device, and I think that's totally great. If you then say, for example, after 4 weeks with the scan, no, that doesn't speak to me at all, or it didn't do anything for my patient, all good. But then you've had the experience. And I believe we also owe it to the patients to simply say, we'll test it out. Just as in human medicine, doctors have to continue their education, I would also find it great if all bioresonance therapists also said, okay, there's something new, phytotherapy, big topic today, I'll try that out. So today I just want to go through the ITP-Scan with you. ITP, Individual Test Protocol. Simply means that we are now in a position, we've had the Rayoscan on the market for humans and animals for quite a while now. And you certainly know there are structures that we predefine, meaning physiologies are checked first. The physiology that has the most severe energetic stress, I might select that one, and then a whole test is run on it in a cause-oriented way. In principle, absolutely great. You get very, very interesting results and the whole thing runs fully automatically. That's also just a nice thing. But can you perhaps imagine what happens when you work with it for a long time? You develop your own ideas, and these tests are dependent on the pulse rate. Sometimes such a test takes, for example, 30, 40 minutes. And that's just the thing now that we said, okay, whoever has started has an idea of the whole thing, but now we're just going a step further and saying, maybe now is also the right time for you to develop your own structures in this test, for you to develop your own test protocols, and for you, for example, to no longer use the complete checkup, but simply ask targeted questions. I don't know, you can certainly all imagine something there. You have a patient in front of you and you automatically get, when they tell you something, they say now, for example, yes, I have pain in my joints somehow, I have this and that and that. So you get an idea about that. Of course, I want to check muscles, joints, but for example, maybe also Borrelia, but maybe I don't want to check a huge thing at all, but I have a very clear idea. And this is also not a patient who is brand new, but I might even know them already. Or I have someone with digestive problems, gas, right, bloating, they feel completely bad and tell me exactly what it is. And then click, right, you can switch over and think, okay, that could go in this or that direction. Of course, I could do the big check beforehand as always, but I think sometimes I just want to be really fast and also develop my own things. And we can now make that possible for you with the ITP-Scan. Meaning, I now simply have a hypothesis-based approach, so that I don't just say fundamentally the whole check that I run through, maybe also for time reasons, I don't know. To be honest, for me, it would never be a time thing, but rather an experience thing, that I would simply say, yeah, I've already had so many patients in one area, I'd like to focus on specific programs. And I can do that now simply with a suspicion, selecting the appropriate detailed test for it, or I just let it run directly. Example, histamine issue. There I can, if I think, okay, that sounds to me like it's a histamine issue, go directly into that area. And I just leave out this whole big cause-oriented story first, perhaps. So, and then I can simply develop these own examples of if-then logic further for myself. If I'm now, for example, in the global test, that sounds to me like it's a histamine issue, go directly into that area, and I just leave out this whole big cause-oriented story first, perhaps. So, and then I can simply develop these own examples of if-then logic further for myself. If I'm now, for example, in the global test, one might spontaneously have the idea to test everything in the complete global test. You can do that, but I now have the possibility to develop my own test protocols, and I can also save them. Meaning if I do the work once to develop my individual test and save it, I can call it up again for every patient. I make myself completely independent of what has existed so far. And that, I think, is simply a totally nice thing. For the global test, I would save the main groups. So, and then I just go first only in the test, I apply the main groups to the organism, and the main groups that are at the very top, they have the strongest energetic stress, and there I go into detail. To be honest, that brings much more than if you test this whole global test and then just get a little bit of information from all different areas. And that way, to be honest, you can put together a completely unique story, phyto, for example, or nutrients. Or for example, how about making a test where you just test our products, base, flora, vita. Each of our products is very clearly shaped in one direction. So if I honestly want to have an idea and don't want to be completely lazy, then I set up my own test, flora, vita, base, for example, look at what is there in priority, and then I can already say, for example, what if flora is at the top towards the intestine? Then I think further, okay, then I'll go further into the intestinal area after all. So I simply have, through these patterns that I can design myself, many, many possibilities. I would just like to give you a bit of a test in this lecture of what could be possible. Professional group specialized profiles. In the past, we had big questions to clarify. If a physiotherapist uses the scan, for example, what do they do if they check their patient, test them, and on top is the heart? It's then hard for him to hide that from the client. He can't say, hey, so your musculoskeletal system isn't a huge issue at all, but you probably have a heart problem. There, the physiotherapist is treading on very thin ice, because that's not allowed at all. He's not allowed to do it. What we can offer now, and that is also a really nice thing. So the physiotherapist we work with is so happy because he says, I now set up the areas in such a way that I test exactly what I ultimately also need as a result, where I have to start, but in the area of the musculoskeletal system. Because this hint of a cardiovascular problem or a kidney problem, he can give it, but he's actually not allowed to, and he didn't feel comfortable doing it either. Therefore, it's so nice now that we can work very specifically for the professional groups. Nutritionists. We have a really large number of nutritionists among us. That has just developed totally nicely. Same problem as with the physiotherapists. Of course, they can also do a lot with the results. But if you look at it quite soberly, they should rather just test the areas they also want to work with and where they can also draw the most results from. And that is actually possible now, right? I can look at metabolism, digestion in a more targeted way, but also our microbiome reference, of course. I can look for intolerances, but also have the nutrient programs checked there again, end, meaning I can pre-program my own sequence directly. And once I've saved it, always remember I go in afterwards with a single press of a button, and then I can run the same test again and again. Own standardized practice programs. That is exactly the idea that I believe will really spread well. I can do it the way I imagine it. It is very easy for my employees to carry out. Because if you take the normal detailed test, let's say digestive system, the connections, this causal interpretation is sometimes so complex that you completely overwhelm someone who is starting out new, for example, an employee. And before you've explained all of how it all connects, it's much nicer if you just make it smaller. And if the wording is always the same, for example, I have an acidification checkup here at the end, that is simply worth its weight in gold. If you say in your practice, I just have the impression that this chronic acidification is really the reason par excellence why a lot of things don't work. My goodness, then make a test for yourself. Put it together. It depends on you how extensive it is, but I'm almost sure it won't be 200 programs. And then you just do, when you have a new contact, so the patient comes to the practice for the first time, immediately this acidification test first. And then I can already say, okay, we'll look at that, and that more closely. From my point of view, very promising and very simple. So I can now simply adjust time, goal, and professional group much more easily. And that, I believe, now simply makes it much more suitable for many more people. Because one thing is that I get a lot of results with the system. But the other thing is that I have to interpret them all. And that is not so easy. Therefore, I believe it's better to reduce to the areas where you really know your way around and where you can also explain the connections. And we have that possibility now. Yes, maybe. I thought I just want to put a few ideas in your head, let's say. Because this is always very theoretical. And when we are now at allergens and at intolerances, for example, cross-allergens are a very large area that you don't always just cover like that. And it is so that, for example, if you have an allergy to birch pollen, cross-allergens to it can be found in apples, for example, meaning that the proteins are very similar and the immune system reacts to them. You might already know that sometimes and think of it too, but how nice would it be if you just saved that? You just look it up, and I find such work, so you definitely need a compendium. You have to be able to Google, and you need time. And then you develop your own strategy. And if you now want to continue with birch pollen, for example, because you have a patient who has problems with it, 70% of these people then have apple, hazelnut, carrot, peach, celery, soy, apricot, and cherry as a cross allergy. We have all those programs, so I'll just include them in this test. Then I'll look a bit further. Now we also very often have the thing, what do I do with allergies? Is it an allergy or rather an intolerance? And I've been asked that very often, just like, how can I differentiate a bit more there now? And we just have to, one thing is that I question the patient, so localized problems, simply that the problems are really only in the mouth area, in the throat area, for example, or whether the whole gastrointestinal area follows. That would now be the thing, either allergy or intolerance. But diamine oxidase, for example, or histamine are simply always in the direction of intolerances. And we do have, for the allergies, definitely allergy type 1, which classically becomes conspicuous, and we have the immune system. So allergy is always completely connected with the immune system. If the immune system is not high up in priority anywhere, then it's also not the program or the direction where it's going. Therefore, I thought, okay, if I already know that here, then I'll make sense of that too. Meaning, with the intolerances, I am really with DAO and histamine. I've always written down the RAH programs on the right, then the liver. If the liver breaks down histamine, and if that becomes very, very difficult, it will also be conspicuous. If the small intestine breaks down histamine, also conspicuous in that direction with intolerances. Mucous membranes head I took again for the symptoms. And that's how I put the things together for myself, one after the other. Flavorings, I've thought about that for a long time now. In theory, I thought, okay, because if they are natural, there could also be a bit of what they stand for in them, so meaning also for apple and so on. But if I don't know that, if they are not nature identical, it makes no sense, then you can also leave them out. And that's how you just have to dig through the programs and options and just see how you get ahead. So now I thought we had a wonderful lecture on phytotherapy. There I said, okay, there too I would like to already include a few plants in my test now, which refers to allergy and intolerance. Because I have so many possibilities now, I took a bit of trouble, first looked at which plant stands for what I can do, and I selected some. One nettle herb, for example, supports in case of allergic reactions. I have chamomile flower, we had that earlier too, has a soothing effect on the mucous membranes, for example. The marshmallow root relieves problems with the mucous membranes. Then I also found dandelion root is also always a nice thing, promotes elimination. And the artichoke herb. Vicky, did I forget anything? I hope not, right? Maybe I just built in the classics. Okay, and these program options now make it even more complete for me because I've added even more possibilities. Yes, and then I look further, what else do I need to have with all these stories? Detoxification. Detoxification programs are extremely important because the problems I have in the body, I just have to look there too. Is it perhaps also due to the fact that I simply have detoxification problems? And there I decided, for example, to include the blood system, intracellular, also because of the histamine breakdown, the detoxification of the liver, but also the kidney and endotoxins. Those were my ideas in this area of detoxification. And you see, it becomes more and more. So, and now I'll look at what I've basically developed more of there. You're all taking photos, but my request, think for yourselves, this is really just to point you in that direction. But what you see now is simply, I now have one where I have this birch pollen allergy. I cannot rule out that he now also has cross-allergens. I look more closely, is it really an allergy or do I have a histamine issue? Then for me, it is very important, again, phytotherapy-wise, what can I perhaps use there energetically? Could I add to the program? Yes, and with the detoxifications, the whole thing, that would now be my test for me, which I would save under cross-allergy with birch pollen. When I have it ready like that, saved, you actually enter the name. We can gladly ask again later in the last break, or whoever wants can also perhaps just ask the regional management again so that you can look at it, set up your own test, and with every patient where you now simply have the idea, you can use that. And that makes it so simple. And I think it's also really nice. We at Rayonics, we offer, I think now over 3,000 programs. That is also totally great. And now with phytotherapy, it will be even more. But I think we have to say goodbye to offering you pre-made tests, because with this possibility, everyone can now really open up a very large pool and develop many, many more therapy tests and also harmonization programs. And there I would ask you all here, that if you do that, you might also contact Rayonics again and simply share it, because it is so nice when we can pass on proven combinations. You can then simply do that in a webinar, in a meeting like this, or you can do a newsletter again or something where we say, based on many successful therapies, the combination of the program was now used for this and that story, for example. I think that would bring us all a whole step forward. And it is so. I would just be happy if more comes from the users, because then it is also really even more practice-oriented. So the interpretation, that is also, I think, another very, very difficult point that we simply have. That means the individual scan works just like all other scans so far, and you have the result listed in priority. And the programs with high priority are just the ones that I definitely have to balance through harmonization. Meaning, if I have histamine at the very top of the result and, then that is also the basis for my therapy program. If I have phytotherapy-wise, let's say nettle at the very top or whatever I had in there, that is the herb I use for harmonization. And then, to be honest, the whole story is not that hard to understand. If I now have histamine and DAO at the top, intolerance, but if I have allergy and immune system at the very top, then I actually go more in the direction of the allergy. And with these little aids, it will simply be easier for you to interpret that. What do I have there and how do I deal with it? If I, for example, for the physios, there too, I've just put something together for you so that you get an idea. I would always go via anatomy first, via the basics. Again, compendium, you open it and you go through the whole list and you just listen to it and think, okay, right, that's important for me, that's interesting, and you write the whole thing down. We have, for example, the knee in this story. But don't just think of this very simple thing. So everyone would say now, musculoskeletal system and knee, yes. But maybe the feet also have something to do with it. Malalignment. Do you think that knee pain can arise from a malalignment of the feet? Yes. And I'm really telling you how it is. I found other things through bioresonance in very interesting diagnoses, and then the diagnosis was obsolete. Because you can certainly have a patient in front of you where everyone then says, yes, that's the meniscus. But the meniscus may have had a problem for a very long time, but the whole thing is triggered by the malalignment of the feet. And if I can get the feet better in correction, then the worn meniscus, in quotation marks, can also compensate for that. There, your imagination is just a bit in demand again now. Diaphragm, for example. Diaphragm and knee are also two things. They are somehow a bit far apart now. But if I have a posture problem, partly due to a diaphragm problem, so that somehow everything doesn't really fit in the posture anymore, I also don't breathe through well, etc., then I will 100% adopt a relieving posture. And if I adopt a relieving posture, you can immediately see I load the knees differently. And if I do that once, no problem. If I do that every day, every week for months, I get knee pain. We can't get around that. So there it is simply the case that you are challenged to just think a bit about it. Proteoglycans here, those are shock absorbers. You can check them everywhere again. Are they there? They store water and they just do this impact thing, for example. They cushion the whole thing. Those are simply areas that may not have been considered at all in conventional medicine. So then let's go further. Knee, spine, lumbar spine. I also think those are logical stories. Then the whole pathology that we have a really lot in the musculoskeletal system. I think that's definitely worth checking, even if it doesn't look like it. But that is our big chance, that we find things energetically that have remained inconspicuous in conventional medicine, and we can start on the right side precisely because of that. Let's go into the hip. If you go with the hip, same story. First, basis of the bones. But it could also become interesting now to look into the area of osteoporosis. Of course, there are also many approaches there. Now you can, of course, say, I can do that with the knee too. Yes, so if it comes to the worst, you have 200 programs again, because all are interesting and important. But there it is up to you to select, what did I just notice in that area? I believe that with a knee problem, one thinks less of osteoporosis than when one is at the hip. Still, it could of course also be with the shoulder. I already see one nods, the other says, you don't look at that at all. So that is also totally interesting how you perceive that yourself, right? Therefore, as I said, just as an idea. Pelvic floor muscles, for example. Something like that is also an area that is often forgotten, right? That we just have a look at that too. Lumbar spine, it goes on joints, cartilage. We have the same story again. I think those things are still quite easy to understand. But we also have the stories here, for example, to consider an inguinal hernia. Things are overlooked. And if the inguinal hernia is there, then it might also cause problems, and maybe for a very, very long time already. And there again, your individual test can actually bring that to light if you just look a bit cleverly at how you organize that for yourself. If I go to the shoulder, I've included the skull, for example. Do you have an idea what's the skull for? What's the head for, sort of? Balance, skull. There too, I think you have to imagine that everything is linked together. If you just look a bit cleverly at how you organize that for yourself. If I go to the shoulder, I've included the skull, for example. Do you have an idea what's the skull for? What's the head for, sort of? Balance, skull. There too, I think you have to imagine that everything is linked together. And if I sometimes set priorities again, when I have the overall programs, they are very large. There's a lot in there. But it simply often shows these little things. If I take things out, then I have clearer results. And therefore also just look a bit further there. So you simply develop a few ideas of how the whole thing could go again. Otherwise, I think thoracic spine, intervertebral discs are also a huge topic. Never forget when you think of it. With the shoulder, the whole pathology again. Fibromyalgia is another huge topic. It can be that you have a patient in front of you and you're spinning in circles because everything hurts them joint-wise, and you do and do and do. And then, for example, the hint, if a fibromyalgia is very high up, I would evaluate that completely differently. With back pain, there again, we have skeleton and spine as a basis. Then I find it extremely important, of course, to consider the intervertebral discs again. We have the ligaments, connections, which all together basically make the whole picture of the back. Back, I think, is simply something where you have to look a lot and experience a lot of your own things. Pathology, unfortunately, here it's still a bit overwritten, but I think everyone can read it like that. Lumbago, with also pay attention to something like that, and simply acute lumbar spines. So, and now we come to the C module. C module is a very special story. Previously, with the Rayotensor, we always had the C module for testing. Now we have it again. But my tip for you now is simply, if you want to use the C module, then please also save the main groups in the test first, because you need an orientation. It doesn't do you much good if you enter absolutely all programs there, for example, and then it starts to prioritize and you have many, many different ones. It definitely makes much more sense for you to take the main groups, save that, just as you ultimately did with the Rayotensor, and then you go further, because from the main groups, the one that is then relevant, I then go into the subgroups. Simply in terms of meaningfulness, you then get to the goal more directly. With the C module, I just want to say again, C module is ultimately pathology. Just like with all other stories, of course, we would always be very careful with what can be made meaningful. But how are our pathology programs determined? The basis is that, for example, let's say we had 10 patients with a clearly defined type of cancer, and they are analyzed in small steps with bioresonance. And the frequency spectrums that are disturbed, they basically share them. They then all have similar frequency spectrums disturbed with the same illness. And from that, we were basically able to extract a pattern so that you have the pattern for the illness. But it definitely says the pattern for the illness. The frequency spectrums are disturbed in the organism. Nothing more and nothing less. That can be a predisposition. It can be something coming. It was something, it has been, or it is currently a problem. But I just want to encourage you to look with this way of frequencies, what can also be determined there. There are so many possibilities, and always keep in mind, this is energetics. So we balance. What is disturbed is balanced by us, and then I have the flow again in the organism. Make it easier for yourself by now defining your own approach yourself. Speech therapists, for example. I don't even know. Do we happen to have someone here who works in that direction? Maybe not right here, but there are simply possibilities there too now. And I think that's also totally nice, because for this professional group, it was also really difficult before to pick out the things that are simply relevant and where I can then simply put a test together and then say, okay, those are definitely already the programs that I can find. You can always supplement the whole thing further and go in all directions. But I think it is very, very important that we simply already optionally have many, many possibilities in that area. With child and language development, for example, hearing organ, balance organ, physiology, vegetative nervous system, those are the possibilities that this ITP-Scan currently offers. Yes, my idea is simply to have conveyed this idea to you now so that you can start anew. So I hope now, right, because I have many questioning looks here who are already like, or one or the other is already thinking, okay, I have this and that patient, or this and that could be my approach. And that is what we simply want to offer, that you simply come back to a complete independence. And the hope is that you might develop totally interesting tests and thus perhaps afterwards also programs from which we can all benefit.